Morning. All right. Rick has pulled me closer. All right. Good morning. To clear all my pockets. There we go. Well, something really tragic happened. Last week, or last time we were together, I had been given some really excellent trivia questions, and I've lost them. So I was going to give you this morning some more of them, but I'm going to have to get them reprinted, and because I enjoyed them, and the answers were great. So I'll get that remedied, and next week I'll have some trivia questions for you again. This morning we're going to be in Luke 19, so let's turn over there. I hope everybody has had a safe couple of days. It's been treacherous at our house. We have a skating rink in my front yard, so feel free to come by. Just the liability is yours. So Luke 19 is where we're going to be. And last time we were together, we looked at Jesus and Zacchaeus, and we talked about the various motivations and what was going on there. And we're going to pick up this morning with the parable of the 10 minas, or minas, depending on how you pronounce that. So let's jump into that, and we'll start reading. We'll read from Luke 19:11 down through 27. As they heard these things, he proceeded to tell them a parable, because he was near to Jerusalem, and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. He said, therefore, a nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom, and then return. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them 10 minas, and said to them, engage in business until I come. But his citizens hated him, and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. When he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know what they had gained by doing business. The first came before him, saying, Lord, your mina has made 10 minas more. He said to him, well done, good servant, because you have been faithful in very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. And the second came along, saying, Lord, your mina has made 5 minas. And he said to him, you are to be over 5 cities. Then another came, saying, Lord, here is your mina, which I kept laid away in a handkerchief. For I was afraid of you, because you are a severe man. You take what you did not deposit, and reap what you did not sow. He said to him, I will condemn you with your own words, you wicked servant. You knew that I was a severe man, taking what I did not deposit, and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money in the bank, and at my coming I might have collected it with interest? And he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him, and give it to the one who has 10 minas. And they said to him, Lord, he has 10 minas. I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given, but from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. But as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them before me. All right. So Jesus drops this in right into the middle of his march towards where? Where's he heading? Okay. And you get a hint as to what's going on and the reason why the parable's given at the very first couple of verses there in verse 11. What's the reason for this parable? Okay. So what does that mean? What's Jesus trying to do with this parable? The people think that the kingdom is to appear immediately, but Jesus offers a parable instead. To do what? To do what? Okay. And what else? If the kingdom is coming and Jesus knows it's coming, why tell them a parable to stop that? Joe?
He wants us to work in the kingdom while he's gone.
Okay.
When he comes back, he will reward us accordingly.
Okay. All right. So that's the Cliff Notes. We need to do a bit of interpretive work to understand what exactly he's talking about here. So are we assuming that the nobleman that goes to receive a kingdom is Jesus? Is that our assumption? Or is it somebody else?
He's going to receive a kingdom.
Okay.
And so Jesus leaves Drew the kingdom can be established,
Okay.
and he can have it as is
Okay,
Seems to fit.
all right. Anybody see any other options available to us? I still want to go back to this main question here. As they heard these things, he proceeded to tell them a parable because he was near to Jerusalem, and because they supposed, the people, that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. What would be wrong with that assumption?
They were thinking that Jesus was going to become king
Okay,
right then, when in reality he was dying,
okay,
being dead for 3 days, rising, going to heaven to prepare
okay,
an eternity.
okay, all right. So we're getting closer now. Just after this parable, Jesus is heading into Jerusalem. What happens? Something very interesting that happens right after this as he heads up towards Jerusalem. Okay. Do you remember what they say? Yes. Said something else along with that. We sing the song. Blessed is the, remember? Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. And where is Jesus going? He's going up into Jerusalem, and they're laying down their coats as he comes in on the back of a donkey into Jerusalem. What did they think was happening? Yeah, the people were saying, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. They were looking at all of the Old Testament prophecies, Zephaniah, I believe, or Zechariah, that said that the king would ride in on a colt. And they see this. They're primed for Jesus and his kingdom. They think the kingdom is coming immediately, so much so that they're even laying their coats down for the king to come up into Jerusalem and take Jerusalem as physical, literal king. And so that happens even after the parable, which tells us what? The parable shot right over the top of them and they missed it. Some of them will have got it. But the triumphal entry shows us that there was this great sense of expectation for Jesus that he was going to go in, perhaps with or without the Pharisees and Sadducees, and he was going to sit on David's throne. He was going to become the messianic king and there buck the Roman system and become this great Davidic Solomon-style king that was going to rule among all the nations as the most powerful nation. And for me, that's the only reason I'm putting my coat on the ground. I need something that important for me to take my coat off. It's cold outside. For these folks, there was this sense that, here, the time has come. So this parable puts, for those of us who can understand it, a bit of a roadblock in the way of that. What's the roadblock that Jesus is offering? We kind of got to it a little bit there. Okay.
Offering saying, if you follow me, there's going to be a greater.
Okay, all right. So rather than the physical, we're looking at spiritual, all right? They were all looking material, earthly kingdom. And Jesus is saying, no, I'm going to get the kingdom. We're going to establish it. But until that actually happens, there's stuff to be done, which tells us that his trip into Jerusalem isn't that. Okay, so that's kind of priming his own disciples to be able to recognize that what's about to happen in the next couple of days is not the culmination of what is going to happen ultimately. I think with that in mind, that helps us to understand this parable a little bit. So then we have to do a little bit more into understanding exactly what all the various terms mean. I think we could confidently take the nobleman as Jesus. Anybody want to disagree? All right. So I think we can take the nobleman as Jesus because the people were looking at him as the potential king. I think that's pretty obvious too. So because they think that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately, he tells them a parable that a nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. Can somebody give me a detail on what this is about? Like, have you ever heard of somebody going to get a kingdom and then coming back again? What are we describing here? Does this make sense to anybody? We can get a little more context by couching this in the Roman terms. Herod the Great, I believe the one that was alive when Jesus was born, was king of all of the Levant, the whole kind of Palestinian area. And his three successors, I think they were all three his sons, Archelaus, Antipas maybe, and another one that I can't recall. The three of them, his domain was split up into three, and they got various parts of the whole kind of Palestinian countryside when Herod died. But the Romans were the rulers. So for them to be able to establish themselves as the replacement for King Herod, what did they have to do? Anybody know what they had to do? They had to take a trip to Rome, and they had to, before the emperor, stake their claim, establish that they were the rightful heirs of the kingdom, and come back and sit as king. And where is Jesus right now? Does anybody know? We've just passed through. Yeah, we're somewhere between Jericho. I think he might still be in Jericho, really close to Jerusalem. All right, so if Jerusalem's here, Jericho's here, Bethpage and the Olivet District, it's really, really close, maybe 5-10 miles away from Jerusalem. And that's why everybody's looking. The king is close. So in Jericho, Judea, Archelaus, Herod Archelaus, was the one that had gone to Rome to stake his claim for this particular region. And what the people did when he did that, because he was an atrocious leader, is they sent a delegation to Rome after him saying, we don't want him as our ruler. The people here would have understood exactly what Jesus was saying because they had seen it in their lifetimes. When Archelaus, I think it was Archelaus, took rulership after his dad died, I believe, or his granddad possibly. He killed 3,000 of his own countrymen, like inside the first month that he had taken the reign. And so when he travels to Rome to be able to say, yes, Caesar, I want to take claim here, it was my father's, and I'll serve you as emperor, and you make me king, and all will be peachy. Then you have this delegation of folks that had followed him and said, we don't want him, he's a horrible guy. Okay, sometimes I hear him say that he doesn't even like Caesar, you know. So what Jesus is saying here tethers right into some cultural things that they understood. So how can we apply that kind of knowledge to Jesus as our nobleman, some servants that need to get some work done, and a delegation that don't want him around? How can we take the allegory and understand it? I would say that's a pretty good bet. Okay. Okay. And you have the disciples then who are given a task of witnessing and teaching and preaching while Jesus is gone. And hasn't Jesus just foretold his own death? That he was going to leave and they were going to be in his place taking responsibility for the kingdom. So you can see as you get the whole context together, you can see Jesus is priming everybody for his departure, for the work of his disciples, and for the nation as a whole who didn't really want him. So there's a lot kind of stuffed in here that we have to break through. Tell me, what does this parable sound like? There's another parable very similar to this. Does anybody know what it is? Parable of the talents, yeah. So some people think that Luke stole the parable of the talents from Matthew's account and just kind of reworked it to make this parable. Some people think that Luke just poorly copied it and got it wrong. I believe this is a completely unique parable from Jesus, Jesus using similar constructs and ideas, but a completely different outcome. What are some of the differences between the parable of the talents and this one? Okay.
That maybe I don't remember from Matthew's account.
Right.
Where they're told to go make a return on an investment, so to speak, and that they're told that there's going to be an adversarial people they're trying to be working with.
Okay.
In this account. I don't remember that from that detail from Matthew's account.
Good. Yep. Anything else?
Delegation that ends up getting slain for him.
Okay. Sure. So in the talents, you have a huge amount of money. A talent was like, 75 pounds worth of precious metals. It would have been, for a common blue-collar guy, it would have been a lifetime supply of income. And some of them were given, huge amounts, like 300 years worth of financial income to deal with, whereas a mina was worth about maybe a third of a year's worth of wages, something like that, maybe less. So you have here in the talents, you have different amounts of huge amounts of money, whereas the mina, everybody's given the same amount, which would represent something for us, that each person is given the same thing, the same responsibility to do something with it. And I think in the parable here, that's faithfulness. Jesus says, there's a nobleman, he's leaving, you have a single task to take care of, and when I come back, we'll see how things go. And so that I think here in this parable is faithfulness. But as was pointed out, I think the focus really here is not about the disciples as much as it is the kingdom and those who oppose. And if that's the case, then it helps us to focus in a little bit more on what all this parable means. So there's a couple of options here, and I'll maybe get your feedback on it. Let's make some assumptions. Jesus is the nobleman. He is going to be killed. He's going to ascend into heaven, where he will be made the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And at the end of all things, when Jesus returns, the end of the church age, he will establish his kingdom at that time as the king, and all of the wicked will be punished. So you'll have the separation between the sheep and the goats. The unrighteous will be put into eternal punishment. The righteous will go off into eternal rest. That's one option here. The second option, I would say, would be that Jesus is going to leave. He's going to ascend into heaven. And at the destruction of Jerusalem, you have his return and the punishment of those who did not want him, which would help us to focus specifically on the Jews who rejected him. So those are, I think, your two options. Do we see a third? Anybody see a third option here? All right, if not, which one do we think we're talking about here? I see Rick moving in his chair a little bit. He's getting uncomfortable. What are your thoughts?
First one sounds a lot like rebuilding. And I really hadn't thought about AD 70 destruction of Jerusalem as being that destruction of his opponents, but it sounds good.
So my problem is that both of them have some tensions in them. For example, when Jesus returns at the end of all things, he will give the kingdom back to the Father. It's not then that he'll establish it. So we have a tension there. Whereas if it's AD 70 with the destruction of things, then you're going to have to call the destruction of Jerusalem a return of the king. So there's some tensions there, because that makes us a little uncomfortable. Are we going to say that Jesus returned in AD 70? How do we take that? So you've got some uncomfortable tensions on both sides. Rick?
But isn't the destruction of Jerusalem referred to as the return of the Son of Man?
Mm-hmm.
So there is an element
For sure.
of judgment.
Sure. So I'll take the veil off. I take the second view, that this is a destruction of Jerusalem event. I don't have a problem calling AD 70 the return of Jesus, or even a return of Jesus. In the Old Testament, you had this constant expression, the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord was coming. And that was a moment where God comes down. Think of Sodom and Gomorrah. God actually comes down out of heaven to have a look around. Did he need to do that? Could God not see from heaven the state of things? Of course he could. The coming down of God in judgment is a theme in the Old Testament that runs the whole way through. And you see these pictures of God riding on the chariots and the clouds, coming to bring swift destruction. It's apocalyptic imagery. And I think Jesus is tapping into that. And I think this parable, in my understanding, is not talking about the end of the world where God will separate the unrighteous and the righteous. I think it's more localized, that Jesus was going to leave, and in AD 70, when he comes back in judgment of the people who rejected him, the Christian age would continue with his servants having even more responsibility. The Christian age growing and developing, and the wicked Jews who rejected him being punished. Derek?
I've never viewed
Okay.
And maybe that's erroneous on my part. You know, that is a Roman war thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't remember, and I could be, like I said, overlooking something, but I don't remember a scripture talking about that as being God's judgment.
Okay.
Like Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, that's
Sure.
very obviously, so that would be my, at least, issue or struggle with that
Sure.
idea.
So I think you have the Matthew 24 and 25 passages, and when you understand those correctly, and again, not everybody agrees with me, but if you understand those correctly, then you have a clear view of the destruction of Jerusalem as a punishment on the nation. But I think if you parallel the destruction of the temple with Nebuchadnezzar, you see a very similar parallel with what's happening in the New Testament. God sends a pagan nation to destroy his own people and his own house for their wickedness. Things continue in exile, and then they're glorified again. So you see this exact same thing with Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple. His people are spread out into the wider world, and then they're recalled again into Jerusalem, and then they reject their king again. And I think you see that in AD 70, a very similar parallel. So maybe we're getting out in the little weeds a bit, but I definitely believe that the destruction of Jerusalem is a day of the Lord level event. Rick?
Hebrews 10:25, so much the more deserved and
Okay.
what day is that?
Mm-mm.
It's
Okay.
I think the passage points to staying faithful
Okay.
during this time period, leading up to that day which you may will be able to
Sure.
and even here in this passage, only a few verses later, Jesus talks about the destruction of Jerusalem in 41 to 44.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even re-emphasizing the parable that he just talked prior to this Bible.
So this is the view I take when you grab all of the context together across all the Gospels. That seems to be the more prominent thing over and over again, is that Jerusalem as the place where God put his name, his covenant people who could have accepted him but rejected him, those people will be punished for their rejection of their own Christ, is a more common thread than at the very end of the world people will be punished. That's much less in view. I think we think it is because that's what we're thinking is happening, but when you get into the context, you find that less and less is that what's in view. Not that I believe that AD 70 is the final end of all things. I don't. I think it was the close of the Jewish system. And that's what was on the mind of Jesus and the people, because that was what was most relevant to them. And it was in their lifetime. And so when Jesus would say things like this, all of these things will come to pass in your generation. There will be some standing here who will not taste death until these things come to pass. How do you tether those words with the end of the world? Well, you can't. But if you understand that these things happened in AD 70, it was absolutely plausible, in fact, the only plausible solution to what some of the things Jesus tied together. That really stretches things because sometimes Jesus says things in apocalyptic language that does not seem to fit with that. You have world-ending level events in Jesus' words that you have to tether into AD 70 that just does not feel comfortable. So, yeah.
Very last word in verse 44 is you did not recognize the day of your visitation.
There you go.
I think that visitation with the day.
Okay. Or that Jesus came and you didn't recognize your king when he came, and now's your destruction level event. Okay. This is what I think the parable is about on the destruction side of things. So let's leave that there, and we can disagree about it some other time, or agree if you think. What then, coming back to the servants and the minas and the trading them and getting something back in the 10 cities, what's this bit about? Anybody? Let's simplify a little bit. To assume then that the time period is from the death of Jesus and his ascension to AD 70 gives us around 40 years. So inside 40 years that it takes Jesus to get his kingdom and come back, again, we're making some assumptions there. What has to be done by the disciples in that time? Okay? Yeah, they've got work to do. Faithfulness, as was pointed out. Isn't it really interesting? Well, try this. Next time you're doing your Bible reading and you come across in Peter or from Paul, there seems to be in all of them this imminent return of Jesus. The day is at hand, they say. There's this sense in all of the apostles that the time where all is done is just around the corner. Be ready, be watchful. They have this sense of immediate urgency, and I think that's because that urgency would come to pass inside that generation. Again, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be an end of things where Jesus returns to the earth. I don't think that's what's being said. I think the urgency is that there was coming an end of the Jewish nation as a whole. All right, so try that. Next time you're reading, see how often there is a call to immediate faithfulness and work and diligence because the end is right around the corner. See if you don't spot some of those. So the work here that they have to do, he calls 10 of his servants, and 10 being an interesting number for us, to engage in business until I come. What would be the business of a king? What would the king want done by his closest servants? What would he want them to do? Okay, grow the kingdom, strengthen its borders, solidify its economy. This my whole kind of year's theme has been on discipleship and kingdom living. What are some of the things as Christians that we do to solidify the kingdom of Jesus and to grow it and strengthen it? Okay. Being exemplary kingdom citizens ourselves gives us the opportunity and the ability to spread the kingdom correctly as its ambassadors and representatives. Anything else? Okay. Let me add the word unity to that. To be unified as his people under the banner of the king. To operate, think, act, and move as unified servants of the king. What does that do? Somebody externally looking at Jesus' kingdom who see a unified group of his followers, servants, acting in unison for the growth and strength and the integrity of the kingdom. What does that do for somebody looking in that's on the outside? Okay, it shows us that there's order. It makes us living in the world surrounded by destruction and evil and decay. That makes us look at that and go, hey, there's something there. Now, some of us might be repelled by that who are still enjoying sin and destruction. And there'll be some who look at that and say, this is everything I don't have, and I want to be a part of that. And of course, you get into the parable of the soils where you have the different hearts that are in different places. Some are receptive, some are not. But having this kingdom here, I think these minas represent kingdom work, faithfulness, evangelism, doctrine, teaching, and one of the most important elements that I think we often miss, Jesus' kingdom was built on love for humanity. Love God, love neighbor. That's what Jesus, this is the main spiel. This is what it's all about. So that Jesus' kingdom's citizens would be about spreading his kingdom, not just with an iron fist of doctrine and teaching, but with service, care, and love, support, and changing humanity, like we've been talking about, the whole way we think and act and feel. We're bringing people into his kingdom because we care for them, that we love them. And that comes back to Rick's point. If that is in us as his servants, then we can spread that. What are your thoughts on that?
As I look at this, I'm curious. You give the 10 minus the 10 servants.
Mm-hmm.
You only get the report on 3 of the 10.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think, obviously, the one who returns double full what he's given is given more.
Mm-hmm.
The one that returns half again what he's given, is acknowledged but not given anymore. And then the one that returns just what he's given is punished. What about those other 7?
Mm-hmm.
Ever thought about that, or why there's no mention of the other 7 who were given the 10?
Okay. What do you think, Joe?
We are to be the salt and the light
Okay.
of the world. If our salt isn't salty,
Right.
we're no good. If our light is dim, we're no good.
No use. Okay. So I think, Derek, to come back to your question, that the having the number 10 as a representative of all, and then picking 3 as a representative of how things have gone well is just typical Hebrew literacy. That's how they did things. So I think he just grabbed 3 for the parable's sake to show that there will be varying degrees of faithfulness. Some will have done exceedingly well, and I don't want to use the word reward, maybe compensation, I don't know exactly how to term that, will be congruous with the work that they've done. And so you see that spread. The 10 gets 10, the 5 gets 5. But the one who doesn't do anything with what he's given is the only one who has some pushback by Jesus. That is to say that if you were given 1 and you worked with it and ended up with 1 still, I think there is still faithfulness there. If the hiding of it and thinking, Jesus is a severe guy, I need to take care of this, I don't want to risk losing it, I'll stick it in my pocket, is the issue, not the amount. The 5 was commended. The 10 was commended. There was probably 3 and 2 who were commended. I think the commendation and the punishment come from the intention. I want to be a faithful servant of Jesus, and I know that he will bless my efforts, so I'm going to take some risks. I'm going to do the best that I can. If that turns out into 10-fold, stellar. If it turns into 5-fold, stellar. It's the thing that I can't do is stuff it in my pocket and say, hope he'll be okay with this when I come back, or he comes back. I think that's what's going on here. What are your thoughts?
Not only does he stuff it in his pocket, he blames it on Moses.
Yeah, Jesus, you're a really tough guy to work with as king. And I knew the kind of guy you were. And it's interesting. Jesus says, well, then I will condemn you with your own words. What you knew about me is what's going to condemn you. That verse middle of 22, you knew that I was a severe man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not do something? Even the minimum could have seen some return.
I never thought of this, but, we always talk about getting as close as we can to the sin.
Yeah,
without
doing it, yeah.
Or how little can I do to avoid condemnation or punishment?
Right.
And that seems to be what this guy
Yes, indeed.
had. And the others were, how much can I do to please him?
There you go. That's a great way of summing up what's happening here. Those that are with the perspective and the attitude that I don't know how this is going to pan out. I've been given 1, and I'm just going to do the best that I can versus I'm going to do the least that I can. And I think that really boils down the whole thing. Because you have some that did well with 5, some did well with 10. Maybe one of these did 50, who knows? I think really it comes down to the intention of the servants to be servants of the king. And so let's grab some application from that then, because I'm almost out of time. What can we take from this for our own Christian lives 2026? Mm-hmm. Sure. Right. Mm-hmm. There you go. Right. Sure. Sure. Right. Yeah. Right. I think there's a good lesson here on apathy, that we don't allow the I'll do it tomorrow attitude, or it's okay, God knows how busy I am. That is a cultural attitude that doesn't have place in the kingdom of Jesus. There has to be work done. There has to be efforts made. What that looks like in your life and my life as a father and a preacher will be different than your life maybe as a mother, or somebody that's in their older years, somebody that's in their teenage years. All of those things are going to be different. I think the single mina given to all is a representation of a responsibility simply to be faithful, and that's why the number is the same, because all of us are given that responsibility. In the talents, you have different talents given, more amounts given to those with greater skills, maybe. But here, there's just this across the board. Everybody has this one responsibility to be faithful until Jesus returns. Okay. So, we covered some pretty good ground there. Any thoughts before we close there?
I think this is still another lesson for the Pharisees.
Okay.
They, taking what God has given them, their authority, their position, the word that they have stored, but they're not using it for the salvation of souls. They're using it for their own benefit.
Yeah, and here,
I think it's
there's going to be punishment.
the same story of the guy with blind.
Okay.
He's keeping it, but that's all he's doing.
Not doing anything valuable with it. Good. All right. Well, we'll close there, and I'll see you in the sermon.